Hello, everybody, and welcome back to my continuation of my book reading of Shawshank Redemption. Part 4. Here we go. That was a strange thing. Boggs was found in a cell, badly beaten, one morning in early June when he didn't show up in the breakfast nose count. He wouldn't see who had done it or how they had gotten to him. But being in my business, I know that his crew can be bribed to do almost anything except get a gun for an inmate. They didn't make big salaries then, and they don't now. And in those days, there was no electronic locking system, no closed circuit TV, no master switches which controlled the whole areas of the prison. Back in 1948, each cell block had its own turnkey. A guard could have been bribed real easy to let someone, maybe 2 or 3 someones, into the block, and yes, even into Diamond's cell. Of course, a job like that would have cost a lot of money. Not by outside standards. No, prison economics are on smaller scale. When you've been in here a while, a dollar bill in your hand looks like a 20 did outside. My guess is that if Boggs was done, it cost someone a serious piece of change, $15. We'll say for the turnkey and 2 or 3 a piece for each of the lump up guys. I'm not saying it was Andy Dufresne, but I do know that he brought in $500 when he came, and he was a banker in the street world. A man who understands better than the rest of us the ways in which money can become power. And I know this, after the beating, the 3 broken ribs, the hemorrhaged eye, the sprayed back, and the dislocated hip, Boggs Diamond left Andy alone. In fact, after that, he left everyone pretty much alone. He got to be like a high wind in the summertime. All bluster and no bite. You could say, in fact, that he turned into a weak sister. And that was the end of Boggs Diamond, a man who might eventually have killed Andy if Andy hadn't taken steps to prevent it. If it was him who took the steps. But it wasn't the end of Andy's trouble with the sisters. There was a little hiatus, and then it began again, although not so hard, not so often. Jackals like easy prey, and they were easier pickings around than Andy Dufresne. He always fought them, that's what I remember. He knew, I guess, that if you let them have at you even once without fighting it, it got much easier to let them have their way without fighting next time. So Andy would turn up with bruises on his face every once in a while. And there was a matter of the 2 broken fingers 6 or 8 months after Diamond's beating. Oh yes, and sometime in late 1949, the man landed in the infirmary with a broken cheekbone. That was probably the result of someone swinging a nice chunk of pipe with the business end wrapped in flannel. He always fought back, and as a result, he did his time in solitary. But I don't think solitary was hardship for Andy. That is, was for some men. He got along with himself. The sisters was something he adjusted himself to, and then in 1950 it stopped almost completely. That is part of my story that I'll get to in due time. In the fall of 1948, Andy met me one morning in the exercise yard and asked me if I could get him half a dozen rock blankets. What the hell are those? I asked. He told me that just what rockhounds called them. They were polished cloth about the size of dish towels. They were heavily padded with a smooth side and a rough side. The smooth side like fine-grained sandpaper, the rough side almost as abrasive as industrial steel wool. And he also kept a box of that in his cell, although he didn't get it from me. I imagine he kited it from the prison laundry. I told him I thought we could do business on those, and I ended up getting them from the very same rock and gem shop where I arranged to get the rock hammer. But this time I charged Andy my usual 10% and not a penny more. I didn't see anything lethal or even dangerous in a dozen 7 squares of padded cloth, rock blankets indeed. It was about 5 months later that Andy asked if I could get him Rita Hayworth. That conversation took place in the auditorium during a movie show. Nowadays we get a movie shows once or twice a week, but back then the shows were monthly events. Usually the movies we got had a morally uplifted message to them, and this one, the last weekend, was no different. The moral was that it's dangerous to drink. It was a moral we could take some comfort in. Andy maneuvered to get next to me, and about halfway through the show, he leaned a little closer and asked if I could get him Rita Hayworth. I'll tell you the truth, it kind of tickled me. He was usually cool, calm, and collected, but that night he was jumpy as hell, almost embarrassed, as if he was asking me to get him a load of Trojans or one of those sheepskin lint gadgets that are supposed to enhance your solitary pleasure, as the magazines put it. He seemed overcharged, a man on the verge of blowing his radiator. I can get her, I said. No sweat, calm down. You want the big one or the little one? At that time, Rita was my best girl. A few years before, it had been Betty Grable, and she came in 2 sizes. For $1 you could get the little Rita. For $2.50 you could have the big Rita, 4 feet high and all woman. The big one, he said, not looking at me. I tell you, he was a hot sketch that night. He was blushing just like a kid trying to get into a coot show with his big brother's draft card. Can you do it? Take it easy. Sure I can't. Does a bear shit in the woods? The audience was applauding and catcalling at the bugs came out of the walls to get Ree Milland, who was having a bad case of DTs. How soon? A week? Maybe less? Okay. But he sounded disappointed, as if he had been hoping I had one stuffed down my pants right now. How much? I quoted him the wholesome price. I could afford to give him this one at cost. Been a good customer. What with his rock hammer and his rock blankets. Furthermore, he'd been a good boy. One night when he was having his troubles with Boggs, Rooster, and the rest, I was wondered how long it would be before he used the rock hammer to crack someone's head open. Posters are a big part of my business, just behind the booze and cigarettes, usually half a step ahead of a reefer. In the 60s, the business exploded in every direction, with lots of people wanted funky hang-ups like Jimi Hendrix, Bob Dylan, that Easy Rider poster, but mostly it's girls, one pin-up queen after another. A few days after I spoke to Ernie, the laundry driver I did business with back then, brought it better than 60 posters. Most of them Rita Hayworth. You may even remember the picture. I sure do. Rita was dressed sort of in a bathing suit, one hand behind her head, her eyes half closed, those full, sulky red lips parted. They called her Rita Hayworth, but they might as well have called it Woman in Heat. The prison administration knows about the black market, in case you were wondering. Sure they do. They probably know as much about my business as I do myself. They live with it because they know that a prison is like a big pressure cooker, and there have to be vents somewhere to let out steam. They make the occasional bust, and I've done time in solitary a time or 3 over the years, but when it's something like posters, they wink. Live and let live. And when a big Rita Hayworth went up in some fishy cell, the assumption was that it came in the mail from a friend or a relative. Of course, all the care packages from friends and relatives are opened and content inventoried. But who goes back and rechecks the inventory sheets for something as harmless as a Rita Hayworth or an Ava Gardner pinup? When you're in a pressure cooker, you learn to live and let live, or somebody will carve you a brand new mouth just about above the Adam's apple. You learn to make allowances. It was Ernie again who took the poster up to Andy's cell, 14 from my own, 6. And it was Ernie who brought back the note, written in Andy's careful hand, just one word, thanks. A little while later, as they filed us out for morning chow, I glanced into his cell and saw Rita over his bunk, in all her swimsuited glory. One hand behind her head, her eyes half closed, those soft, satiny lips parted. It was over his bunk, where he could look at her nights after lights out in the glow of the arc sodium in the exercise yard. But in the bright morning sunlight, there were dark slashes across her face, the shadows of the bars on his single slit window. Now I'm going to tell you what happened in mid-May of 1950 that finally ended Andy's 3-year series of skirmishes with the sisters. It was also the incident which eventually got him out of the laundry and into the library, where he filed out his work time until he left our happy little family earlier this year. You may have noticed how much of what I've told you already is hearsay. Someone saw something or told me that I told you. Well, in some cases, I've simplified it even more than it really was, and have actually repeated or will repeat 4th or 5th hand information. That's the way it is here. The grapevine is very real, and you have to use it if you're going to stay ahead. Also, of course, you have to know how to pick out the grains of truth from the chaff of lies, rumors, and wish it had beens. You may also have gotten the idea that I'm describing someone who's more legend than man, and I would have to agree that there's some truth to that. To us long-timers who knew Andy over a space of years, there was an element of fantasy to him. A sense almost of myth magic, if you get what I mean. That story I passed on about Andy refusing to give Boggs Diamonds a head job is part of that myth. And how he kept on fighting the sisters is part of it. And how he got the library job is part of it too. But with one important difference. I was there and I saw what happened, and I swear on my mother's name that's all true. The oath of a conviction murderer may not be worth much, but believe this, I don't lie. Andy and I were on fair speaking terms by then. The guy fascinated me. Looking back to the poster episodes, I see there's one thing I neglected to tell you, and maybe I should. 5 weeks after he hung Rita up, I'd forgotten all about it by then, and had gone on to the other deals, Ernie passed a small white box through the bars of my cell. From Dufresne, he said, low and never missed a stroke with his push broom. Thanks, Ernie, I said. I slipped him half a pack of Camels. Now what the hell was this? I was wondering as I slipped the cover from the box. There was a lot of white cotton inside, and below that, I looked for a long time. For a few minutes, it was like I didn't even dare touch them. They were so pretty. There's a crying shortage of pretty things in the slam, and a real pity of it is that a lot of men don't even seem to miss them. There were 2 pieces of quartz in that box, both of them carefully polished. They had been chipped into driftwood shapes. There were little sparkles of iron parities in them, like flecks of gold. If they hadn't been so heavy, they would have served as a fine pair of men's cufflinks. They were that close to being a matching set. How much work went into creating those two pieces? Hours and hours after lights out, I knew that. First the chipping, shaping, then the almost endless polishing and finishing with those rock blankets. Looking at them, I felt the warmth that any man or woman feels when he or she is looking at something pretty, something that has been worked and made. That's the thing that really separates us from the animals, I think. And I felt something else too, a sense of awe when a man's brute persistence. But I never knew just how persistent Andy Dufresne could be until much later. In May of 1950, the powers that be decided that the roof of the license plate factory ought to be resurfaced with roofing tar. They wanted it done before it got too hot up there, and they asked for volunteers for the work, which was planned to take about a week. More than 70 men spoke up because it was outside work, and May is one damn fine month for outside work. 9 or 10 names were drawn out of a hat, and 2 of them happened to be Andy's and my own. For the rest of the week, we'd be marched out to the exercise yard after breakfast with 2 guards up front and 2 more behind, plus all the guards in the towers keeping a weather eye on the proceedings through their field glasses for good measure. 4 of us would be carrying a big extended ladder on those morning marches. I almost got a kick out of the way Dixie Betts, who was on that job, called that sort of ladder extensible. And we put it up against the side of that low flat building. Then we start brigading hot buckets of tar up to the roof. Spill that shit on you and your jitterbug all the way to the infirmary. And that, here I'm going to end it for my continuation of my book reading of Shawshank Redemption. Thank you so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. Take care, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thank you. Bye-bye.